Tonight on Primetime Politics, a statement for calm.
We stand ready to pick up on that progress and build on that progress when the Americans are ready.
The Prime Minister reacts to the latest trade blow from Donald Trump. The U.S. President terminating trade talks over an Ontario ad that's running in the United States. What options are now available to Mark Carney? Coming up, we will speak to former UN Ambassador Louise Blais and the former U.S. Ambassador to Canada, David Jacboson. Plus,
but over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer.
The Ottawa Bureau Chiefs on the political pressure now on Mark Carney because of the ad you just saw. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Ready to resume talks. That essentially is the message we heard from the Prime Minister today. Mark Carney sharing those words before flying to Asia for a 9-day trade and diplomatic mission. Now, last night, the U.S. President made it known he was terminating trade talks with Canada, blaming an Ontario ad that criticized Donald Trump's tariff policies. Take a listen now to how the Prime Minister responded to that news of the U.S. walking away from trade talks.
For months, we have stressed the importance of distinguishing things we can control and things we can't control. We can't control the trade policy of the United States. We recognize that that policy has fundamentally changed from the policy in the 1980s, 1990s, 2000s. And it's a situation where the United States has tariffs against every one of their trading partners to different degrees. And it's in that context that our officials, my colleagues, have been working with their American colleagues on detailed, constructive negotiations, discussions on specific transactions, specific sectors, steel, aluminum, and energy. And a lot of progress has been made. And we stand ready to pick up on that progress and build on that progress when the Americans are ready to have those discussions, because it will be for the benefit of workers in the United States, workers in Canada, and families in both of our countries. Now, what we can control, absolutely, is how we build here at home, and that's the focus of Budget 2025, generational investment here in Canada. And what we can also control, or at least heavily influence, is developing new partnerships and opportunities, including with the economic giants of Asia, which is the focus of this trip.
The ad that Donald Trump is reacting to is the ad that you're looking at right now. It's been running in the U.S. for several nights, and it features a speech from former U.S. President Ronald Reagan warning about the dangers of tariffs. But Trump calls that claim fake and wrote on social media, "Tariffs are very important to the national security and economy of the USA. Based on their egregious behavior," says Donald Trump, "all trade negotiations with Canada are hereby terminated." And then, in the early morning hours of Friday, added, "Canada cheated and got caught. They fraudulently took a big buy ad saying that Ronald Reagan did not like tariffs when he actually loved tariffs for our country and its national security." Canada, says Donald Trump, is trying to illegally influence the United States Supreme Court in one of the most important rulings in the history of our country. So what to make of this end in talks? Where do things go from here? Joining us right now is Louise Blais, a senior strategic advisor on international affairs. Madame Blais also served as Canada's ambassador to the United Nations from 2017 to 2021. Madame Blais, good to see you again. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Listen, I want to begin here with a statement that we got this afternoon from Lana Payne. As you know, she's the president of Unifor, this country's largest private sector union. And she says Trump's outrage over this Ontario ad is fake. And really what this is, says Lana Payne, is a ploy to sabotage any progress that's being made by Canadian trade negotiators. Do you think that is the case?
Well, I wouldn't put it quite that way in those words, but definitely I believe that this was a handy excuse that could be used by the president. I think that after some headway following the visit by Mark Carney to the Oval Office a few weeks ago, I think the talks were starting to stall again. And this is a way for the president to add additional pressure on the Canadian side to get some concessions that he feels we should make.
Okay, so a way to add pressure, and I don't have to tell this to you. Anyone who observes this knows that Donald Trump is mercurial when he comes to trade talks with Canada, quite frankly with other countries as well. So do you think this termination of talks, as he put it in his social media post last night, is really that, or is this merely a pause?
Well, I think it is a big jolt. I think the language is quite clear, but I think we've been there before. He said the same thing after the DST, and we were able, after a few days, to bring him back to the table. Now, the question is, what is it going to take this time? Last time, we had to throw in the DST. This time, what is it going to be? I think that on the Canadian side, I'm speculating here, but I think we're going to take a deep breath here, take the next few days, regroup, rethink. We know that the president and the prime minister could have a chance to see each other in person. And I think there's going to be hope that the prime minister can have a word with the president while in Asia, and that they can, that they can perhaps restart things. But I think it's going to take. Donald Trump is not going to say, "Oh, we're just restarting." He's going to need to explain to the American people why it is that all of a sudden there are going to be more talks. So what that is unclear. Already, the U.S. side had us negotiating on only three sectors: steel, aluminum, energy. When really the problem is wider, it seems that they wanted us to make concessions on those sectors that are more important to them. I don't know. Does that continue after today? We'll have to wait and see. Maybe it's an opportunity for the Canadian side to also rethink our approach.
Yeah, rethink our approach. And that brings me to these ads, or this Ontario ad rather, because the Prime Minister, in giving the statement before boarding that plane to Asia this morning, he did not ask Ontario to pull down this ad campaign that Donald Trump has found objectionable. In fact, today we're hearing from the BC Premier, who not only supports Ontario on this, but says BC will soon be launching its own anti-tariff ad campaign. And then Premier Wapkiniw of Manitoba says he supports the Ontario ad. And, the ads are targeted at a U.S. audience to warn them about the implications of tariffs. But should they be pulled down?
Well, it's clear that from today, they won't be in the short term. I mean, the foundation, the Ronald Reagan Foundation, has talked about potential judicial action. So it's possible they'll have to be pulled down, depending on what happens if there's an injunction. But I think it appears that we're not backing down on the ad. I mean, look, was that the right tactic? Who knows? I mean, I think that it's quite difficult to change the hearts and mind of a population of several hundred millions of people with an ad. It's not a Super Bowl ad here. What was it going to achieve in itself? And now it's really seems to have irked the president to some degree. I believe, as I said, that it is still being used as a good theater to end the discussions and apply pressure. So we'll have to wait and see. I personally, from my experience representing Canada in the United States, it's always been more effective to have conversations in the background directly with decision makers and those around them, the stakeholders. Taking the message to the general population of Americans is really, has not, in my experience, been the way to make progress. But we'll have to wait and see. I think we have to build trust. And I think if anything undermines that trust when we're negotiating, I think it's likely unhelpful.
Mm-hmm. Can I go back a little bit to what you were saying about Americans perhaps asking for more than what was being discussed, steel, aluminum, and energy. And in my mind, when you say something like that, immediately pops into my head agriculture, access to our marketing boards, to dairy in this country, and softwood lumber. Does that mean then that really, for all the talks we have about these potential side deals, that we're going to actually have to wait till a CUSMA review next year before these issues are solved?
Well, Michael, you're absolutely right. And I think anything we do short term for relief on certain sectors, because the tariffs are so high due to Section 232, I think we have to make sure that we don't do anything at the expense of the USMCA renewal. I think we've separated the two, and for understanding reasons, I get it. But at the same time, really, the jewel and the crown is indeed USMCA. So I think whatever move we take, it's like playing a game in chess, and we have to make sure that we don't put ourselves in a corner for those negotiations. So we have cards left to play next year, and that we have the right attitude and the goodwill and the kind of rapport that's going to help us across the finish line. So short term is great, but it can't come at the expense of our global interests next year.
And as you say, at this point, both the Prime Minister and the President are on the way to Asia to attend both ASEAN and APEC over the next 10 days or so. So we'll see what happens there. But Louise Blais, really, I always appreciate the time and the insight. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Michael. Good to see you.
And you. Well, you'll appreciate that this is a developing story, and just after that interview, the Ontario Premier released this statement on the ad campaign stating the following, quote, "Our intention was always to initiate a conversation about the kind of economy that Americans want to build and the impact of tariffs on workers and businesses. We have achieved our goal, having reached U.S. audiences at the highest levels. In speaking with the Prime Minister Carney, Ontario will now pause its U.S. advertising campaign effective Monday so that trade talks can resume." Again, that is the statement that we received this afternoon from the Ontario Premier. To talk about all of this, we're now reaching out to David Jacboson, currently with the Wilson Centre. From 2009 to 2013, he served as the 29th United States Ambassador to Canada. Ambassador Jacboson, always good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Good to see you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Listen, I want to begin with that Ontario ad. We know that they will run through this weekend, coinciding with the first two games of the World Series. They will then, as you heard in that statement, be pulled come Monday in hopes of restarting trade talks. What do you think of that strategy?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that running an ad a couple of times would have some fundamental impact on the American people or the folks in Congress, or certainly on Donald Trump. But the ad, at least as I understand it, was accurate. And I think the president's response to it was rather petulant. But the question in my mind, there was one thing that the premier said in his statement was so that trade talks can begin again. And I am not positive that pulling the ad on Monday is going to get trade talks started again. The president tends to change his mind a lot. Maybe he'll change his mind about this, but it is by no means a certainty.
Is that because the ad did that much damage, or you think it's given the administration an excuse to walk away from talks right now?
I don't think the ad did any enormous damage to anything. And I'm not sure if it's an excuse to walk away from talks, if it's a negotiation strategy. The president seems to think he's the greatest negotiator in the history of the world. And he clearly likes to be aggressive in negotiations. He has cut off talks with Canadians before. He has cut off talks with everybody before at one point or another. And then he seems to come back to the table. I suspect that is what's going to happen here, but there's no certainty of that.
Yeah, no certainty, and just no certainty, as you say. Although at this point, we know that tariffs are hurting, Canadians and hurting Americans. I was reading that in terms of Americans, with the automakers in the United States, these tariffs in these last few months have already cost the industry $10 billion. And I saw another estimate that says tariffs would cost American small businesses over $80 billion collectively. Where is the business community right now, the industry right now? Have they been making appeals to Donald Trump? Is that a worthwhile avenue?
They have. A number of businesses have gone to the president. When I was the ambassador, while I then and now have great affection for Canada and had a wonderful time there, my fundamental view then and now was what's good for the United States. And these tariffs are not good for the United States. As you point out, they hurt manufacturers, they raise the prices for consumers, they disrupt supply chains. and create great uncertainty in the marketplace. So from the U.S. perspective, let alone the Canadian perspective, these things are not good.
Mm-hmm. I wonder what your advice would be right now to the Canadian government, and I appreciate that's not your role, but here they are trying to navigate this administration, trying to come up with at least some side deals before we get to the CUSMA, the USMCA review next year. What is your advice to the Carney government right now?
Well, first of all, I don't think Mark Carney needs my advice. I will say, as a matter of disclosure, I'm good friends with the Prime Minister. I think he's a quite able person. I think if he wanted to know what I had to say, the first thing I would do is tell everybody to take a deep breath. As we talked about, the president may change his mind on Tuesday or Thursday or today. I would sort of perceive this as a pause and not the end of conversations between the United States and Canada. Canada, like many other countries around the world, has to walk a very thin tightrope. On the one hand, for a whole lot of reasons, some of them domestic political, some of them just because it's right, there's a feeling that you want to, I think the term that Prime Minister has used is elbows up. You want to be aggressive. On the other hand, you are dealing with someone who is very thin-skinned. He sees an ad on TV and decides to penalize 35 million people in Canada and 350 million people in the United States. I would be very careful in how I go forth. The other thing, though, that I would do, and I believe the Prime Minister is doing this, I think, literally as we speak, is looking for other markets. The United States is always going to be the largest export market for Canada. It's true because of geography, for language, the size of our market, history, a whole lot of reasons. But, it doesn't have to be 75 or 80%. And if I were Canada, just like if I were France or I were any other country that's having a problem with the U.S. tariffs, I would be looking to broaden my export base. It's never going to make up for the United States, but it's going to ameliorate the problem. And I think fundamentally, if you ask, what should the strategy be? It should be do as little damage as possible over the course of the next 3 years of the Trump administration. Hopefully things will get better, and hopefully the next guy will be a little bit more reasonable.
Ambassador Jacboson, as I say, I always appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
It's a pleasure. Happy to talk anytime.
You take care. The Trump decision to end the trade talks with Canada dominated this week's episode of the Bureau Chiefs podcast. Take a listen to an excerpt from this week's conversation as we talk about the impact of that Ontario ad and whether the Carney government has done enough to prepare Canadians for tough economic times ahead.
Well, I don't think they're well prepared enough. I don't think that we've heard enough from the government, but it's counterintuitive. What government wants to go out there and say, hey, everybody, despair, we're in trouble, right? They want to offer hope to everybody that there is an ability to build resilience in Canada and to diversify trade. So the political pressure, I think, though, funnily enough, with Trump's outburst Thursday night, allows perhaps some of Carney's critics to say, well, see, who can deal with that? That is an unpredictable force in the White House, and everybody knows it. And if you needed more proof, here again is proof. So I think that political pressure kind of plays both ways. I don't hear from any of his critics on the other side of the aisle a better approach to how to deal with Trump yet. So that's the thing that plays in their favor.
Mr. Carney's speech on Wednesday, I think, is raising expectations about the budget, that it may be the solution to our economic ailings. But also, Mr. Trump's outburst is, again, pushing Canadian patriotism in the right direction. I've seen people rallying around Mr. Ford's advertising, namely the Premier of Manitoba, Wab Kinew, who was very, very good at, imitating Ronald Reagan in a very old TV. But also, Mr. Ford's campaign is also, I think, stirring a big debate in the United States about what it means to be protectionist, what it means to be following the policies of Ronald Reagan. I've seen many, influential leaders in the United States, like the governor of California, picking up on Mr. Doug Ford's campaign and putting his own grain of salt. Same thing with the governor of Pennsylvania, Mr. Josh Shapiro, I think is his name. So it is stirring a debate in the United States, and that's what Mr. Trump was probably fearing, that this ad, really...
Well, he's made the ad even more.
Exactly.
Right?
It's got attention in Australia.
And it got the attention of Chuck Schumer as well. It's speaking of American politicians that jumped onto it.
So Mr. Ford accomplished more, I think, with this ad than any negotiations Mr. Carney and his team has accomplished, I would say.
Okay, but let's talk about the strategy of that, though, because you mentioned that Wab Kinew is now supportive of Doug Ford. So is David Eby, the Premier of British Columbia. In fact, he says BC is going to have their own kind of tariff ad push in the United States.
On lumber, I think.
On lumber, exactly. So although counter to that is this social media post, and this is from Brad Wall, former Saskatchewan Premier, and he says, quote, his asinine, and his referring to Doug Ford, his asinine threat to shut off power to the U.S., the Crown Royal poor, and now this. Premier Ford should understand that while these stunts might be good politics with the elbows up crowd in Ontario, they are more than reckless in terms of our economy. And I invite you to comment on that message if you want to. But to me, it underlines just the difficulty of this moment as well, because the longer these trade negotiations drag out, it is far harder to maintain national unity where provinces are now going to be competing against each other. And exactly what we said we were going to, not we, but Team Canada said they were going to try to avoid a sectoral fight-off as to who's going to survive.
Well, look, compare this to the 2018 free trade negotiations where there was really a Team Canada approach. They were able to stay united because Donald Trump wasn't hitting all these sectors with big tariffs. Well, now he's hitting people, whether it's 45% tariffs on lumber, which is basically hitting mainly British Columbia, but also Northern Ontario, Northern Quebec.
Newfoundland, Atlantic Canada,
and the steel and the aluminum, the autos. So all of these premiers are feeling the pressure, and they're all coming out. And how do you? It's really difficult to try to maintain a Team Canada approach when, say, okay, right now they're trying to save the steel and aluminum sector. And the other premiers are saying, well, what about lumber? What about canola? What about, he's got the Prime Minister has a very difficult task ahead of him to try to keep the premiers united, which I don't think is probably going to be possible given the sectoral tariffs that the President has been imposing on Canada. All he's got to try to do is to keep his eye on the ball, try to get deals that'll never satisfy anybody, but they'll be better than what we are having, and hope that Canadians will row with him towards a future where we're going to have major infrastructure projects that are going to get our resources to market and try to create homegrown jobs. And that's where we're at, but it's a long ways away.
Yeah, and we'll pick up on that again in a bit. But Tonda, what do you think about, again, not only the comment there from Brad Wall essentially saying these types of ads are actually not helpful to the national economy bottom line, but also this idea that the longer this does drag out, we're going to see disunity in this country, greater disunity in this country.
Because of the pain that will be felt, and that's pretty clear. To Bob's point, its sectors are heavily concentrated in certain areas, right? I think that what the latest outburst from Mr. Trump shows also to the Canadians is that even if you talk about settling a few things and putting the rest of the big heavy lifting off to the COSMA, for lack of the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade agreement. It was so easy when it was NAFTA, wasn't it?
I agree.
When putting all those talks on auto and lumber and dairy and everything else off into that table doesn't guarantee any more success. Yes, perhaps it's a more structured negotiation at that time, but who knows when or if we'll ever get there, if Trump will be willing to go along with a trilateral deal. He has expressed distinct ambivalence. He just as soon prefer bilateral deal with Canada, bilateral deal with Mexico. So there's no guarantee there's an end to the overall tariff pain anytime soon. So to Bob's point, I think he's right. There is going to be fractures in the Federation. And just wait until Doug Ford makes good on his threat to maybe leverage energy and critical minerals resources. That's going to be a whole other ballgame.
Absolutely. But and when you look around, I talked about the Quebec Premier, François Legault. He's been pretty quiet over the last on this commercial issue, and then he's trying to save his political skin. That's the main reason. So he's focused on his own future and not the future of the economy. But when you look around how this commercial war has affected Canada, Ontario is very much on the forefront because of the auto sector. You've seen job losses already. And steel. And whereas in Quebec, the aluminum has been able to be diverted to Europe, most of it. So the shock is less pronounced in Quebec than Ontario, but Ontario is facing the big brunt right now of this commercial war. That's why you see Mr. Ford, being so vocal about it. And it's all fine and dandy for Mr. Brad Wall to lecture Mr. Ford, but I would, invite him to come and try to run Ontario if he would have the same kind of
He doesn't
reasoning.
hold any elected political office, so he's not accountable to anyone. And it's for, everybody's got freedom to express that kind of an opinion, but I think that the conservative political leaders in this country are also sort of weighing what is the next step, what is the right step. They're all fighting for the regions, be it Smith, be it Legault, be it Scott Moe. Everybody's got a special interest to protect.
And by the way, who would have thought that these ads would have set Donald Trump off? I mean, really,
because he watches late night baseball.
But they have been running for about a week now.
The ads are running in heavy rotation on Fox News. That's where Trump likely saw it.
Yeah, he saw it it was the Blue Jays Mariners game on Fox News in the United States. That's where he saw the ad.
Okay, well, there you have it. Exclusive reporting there from Joël-Denis.
Not because I was in the room with him, because that's what I was told.
And that was Robert Fife, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for LaPresse. And what you heard is part of a new podcast from PrimeTime Politics and CPAC. It's called The Bureau Chiefs with Michael Serapio. New episodes will drop each Friday that PTP is on air. The latest episode is available now. And I am Michael Serapio. That's Primetime Politics for this Friday. We are back next week, and for everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.